Conversations with the Mind podcast, where we explore consciousness through conversations with interesting people. Our mission is to engage the collective mind piece by piece to bring greater clarity of mind to our listeners locally and across the planet, and to contribute to broaden the shared experiential knowledge and wisdom of existence. All right, folks, welcome back to Conversations with the Mind. I'm your host, Shane LeMaster, and we are here for an amazing episode. Today is episode number 100. Our, what is that called? The centennial episode. It's quite a big landmark for the podcast. I started this thing 2 or 3 years ago, and never thought I'd make it this far, but I'm super happy to be here and super happy to be here with a very special guest, Mr. Keven Matthews, who's been on the show before. I can't recall which number episode you were on before, but it was back, I know before number 40, because that's when I upgraded my systems, and we were recording in my living room on my phone. So that was back. Yeah, that was back in the early days of the podcast. So welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Shane. What an honor to be your 100th guest, my brother.
Yeah, I had to make sure I brought on some bigwig for the 100th.
Well, you got it. You got the big wig, and as you can see, my hair is, I don't know, it's looking good these days. It's thinning out a little bit, but trying to let it roam free.
Yeah, you got a little bit of a puff on top. I like it.
There's a puff. Yeah, there's the puff. Unstyled.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly why I wear a hat today. It's because
together. And I think it was like June. It must have been June 2019, right? Because it was just a few weeks after the initiative passed.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember how much I was sweating, dude. Do you remember how much I was sweating?
I don't remember.
I was dripping, dude. I was like, is Shane gonna see like how nervous I am right now? And like totally on cloud nine, still from our crazy win in Denver. But we could say I was a hot mess in some way that day, but it was super fun.
Yeah, well, hopefully you've been able to relax a little bit into this new reality that we've helped create, and you've been a huge part of. So obviously want to express gratitude for you and your service and what you do to help us all be able to explore our consciousness in any way that we choose. So thank you.
No, you're so welcome. Yeah. And thank you, man. It's been an incredible, it's been a roller coaster for sure. And the one thing that I just every single day, these stories, man, and people who come out of the woodwork and say, just this world is changing, man. It's cognitive liberty, and we have a right to heal. Let's do this.
Yeah, and you're connected to so many people across the country. And you talk about these stories that come in, and, we'll eventually get into talking about Vote Nature and how stories come into play there. But, before I ask my standardized question for all guests, I'm wondering, can you share with the audience some of those stories that have been the most impactful for you, that have come in from people just all over the country that have talked to you about some of these new freedoms?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the first one that comes to mind is actually a recent one. And a woman got in touch with me. She was actually, her information was actually forwarded to me from a mutual friend here in Colorado. And this is a woman with stage 4 terminal cancer. And she just so happens to be a social worker. So she's in the health field, right? And she exhausted her options in terms of finding just psychological relief from knowing that she was going to. And she got in touch. She shared a little bit about herself, Um, but then just shared like how tremendous and how impactful it was for her to find an underground guide or therapist to work with her to move through some of the trauma that she was experiencing because of her terminal illness. And and this was with psilocybin mushrooms, right? And underground practitioners, it's still a Schedule One substance throughout the entire country, except in Oregon, right? She's here in Colorado, and it impacted her so much that she wants to get involved with the reform movement. And this is a person who certainly doesn't have to take the time to do that. Like, she's approaching the end of her life, and this is something that's so important to her that she wants to get for other people to have similar experience. And so there's that story. And she's awesome. She's going to jump on to the work we're doing in Denver, and if there's a statewide effort, I think she's going to be involved with that too. Um, Another story, I spoke with this young man who's actually based down near Oakland a few weeks back and a few months back, and he reached out over Instagram, and he'd been following the movement for a while. He'd been following Decriminalized Nature, and he'd been following Spore, and of course he knew about the work that we did. And young kid, probably I think he was in his early 20s, maybe 22, 23 years old, and he was looking for community, right? Because he had an experience. He was using like overall kind of wellness purposes, exploring his consciousness, also, some mental health stuff, but young, excited to get involved, right? And really wanting to find his tribe or find his community or find the others, and we had an awesome conversation. And, it's these stories they happen all the time. Like my story isn't unique. Like my story is psilocybin mushrooms helped me with major depression, you know, and kind of catalyzed in some way catalyzed my work here. And I mean, it's just it's the kind of thing that in terms of a movement that has the potential to make really incredible, that's to me that's the psychedelic movement, that's the entheogen movement, because it's going to impact, at least I think it's going to impact almost every single facet of the human experience.
Mm.
um, once psilocybin, once other entheogens or psychedelics are both decriminalized and regulated in some way. So yeah, I mean, the stories, and what I found, which we can talk about a little bit more later, obviously, but like the stories, I think the stories make the biggest difference. The research is critical, but it's when we put a face and a voice, you know, to this movement, to these stories, that has people who are on the fence either become more curious and interested, or even change their mind.
Yeah.
It's powerful. Yeah.
And I just want to mention to the audience, Keven and I are experiencing a little bit of internet connectivity issues. So if you hear either of us cut out at all during the podcast, I sincerely apologize for that. Hopefully, your brain can help fill in the gaps, as it's really good at doing. Um, yeah, but that happens, especially in a modern world where we are so reliant on technology, and we do our best. So, all right, Keven. Well, I need to ask you, my only standard question, which I ask all my guests, and I asked you at our last podcast a few years ago, and really, I want to know how your answer, how your your ideas around this question have changed since then. And that is, what does the phrase "conversations with the mind" mean to you? How has that changed for you, and what does it currently mean in your own practice, in your own work, in your own experience of everyday consciousness?
Remember what I said the last time 2 years ago?
I
Did
don't.
you go back and look at that?
No, I don't.
Because I know that my definition has likely changed tremendously.
It does.
And especially in the last couple of months after some pretty heavy journeys with our plant and fungal medicine allies. So what does conversations with the mind mean to me? Oh, it's a dance. It's a dance. Um, because the mind can be a trickster in many ways. And when I think of the mind, I think of it as being, you know, body from the brain, right? Like we have all these neurochemical processes that happen in our body, in our brain, that create or facilitate certain feelings from certain hormones that get released throughout our body that are coursing through our veins that cause our heart rate to speed up or slow down, or perspiration and sweat to happen. And it's been interesting really recently watching how my mind reacts to certain situations, which is why I say it's a dance. Because what I've noticed is that there's a difference between reacting to an external stimulus or an internal stimulus and responding to it. And then that's something I've really been focusing on a lot in my own life is what's my self-talk? What am I constantly saying to myself that creates my reality? That the words that I use, the spells that I cast inside the confines of my own experience. What's that logos that I'm expressing to myself and then expressing to the world, right? And so I think that I'm learning how to quiet the mind a little bit more. Especially, I heard something the other day on another podcast where human beings are processing more information in one day now than a person did 100 years ago in their entire lifetime. Can you imagine that? What that's even like, dude? Like, have in their mental field to like take a moment to breathe and be with their environment and be with their body, you know. And what I found for myself that I really want to get a lot better at is quieting the mind, because I can be super cerebral, very heady, and I've got to be careful about the conversations I actually have with myself, because I am a firm believer that that what we say to ourselves creates our reality, it creates our experience of the world, which is why it's so important to learn how to respond, response ability. What's our ability to respond to situations as distinct from, reacting to me. Yeah, habitually ingrained. Like, I'd like to change. I'd like to respond more than react more. And I think responding more requires more, um, actually, mindlessness. Um, I love the term mindfulness, right? I think it's important to be mindful, but I'm also very curious about the term mindlessness. Like, how often do we like in Western culture, right? When we talk about mindlessness, it sounds like, oh, you're crazy. It's a crazy person. But no, what if that's like you're like plunged into a state of total awe and bliss at simply being alive and being human, and there's no mind there to interfere with the experience because you're simply just witnessing it all, you know. So I think being more in the practice of mindlessness and like, finding that flow state is more of a priority for me these days. And then learning how, um, and then taking those experiences, those kind of numinous states of consciousness that can be experienced when the mind is out of the way, and learning how to stabilize, or maybe a better way to say this, create more of a lifestyle around those higher states of consciousness. So being more embodied with it, and like using the mind as like a tactical tool to like problem solve. Um, and I think like also, at least for me, I'm learning that learning how to trust my intuition more than my mind. Like I think the mind can be a powerful like analytical tool to kind of learning how to drop more into my gut and like the heart space, to listen more. Um, yeah, so that's where I'm at today with conversations with the mind, brother.
Nice. Yeah, there's a couple of things in there that I just wanted to touch on. You know, this idea of mindlessness is, the words mindlessness and mindfulness sort of get in the way a little bit, because in the East, mindfulness means paying attention to the moment, right? Being completely present, um, and having a mindless mind state, right? Like getting the mind out of the way is what mindfulness means in the East. But you bring that term over here in the West, and mindfulness, I mean, you break it down, mindful, it sort of implies that your mind is full of content, you know, um, whereas mindless means empty of content. And it's weird, just that wordplay between the two. But I agree with you. I think the mind gets in the way a lot of the time. Um, and I'm thinking about even during altered states of consciousness, when we try to engage the intellectual mind during those experiences, and we get into analysis of the experience as it's happening, like that tends to get in the way of the experiencing of the event itself. And for me anyway, when I engage that part of my brain, I lose content. I get stuck in one section of the experience because I'm analyzing it, as opposed to if I just let go and let my mind sort of, you know, go into a mindless state and just go with the flow and go with the experience, I get so much more from the experience. So that's interesting, those two comparisons. And the other thing you said was it's like a dance, right? And I want you to clarify a little bit, because when I think of a dance, I think of two things. I think of dancing with a partner, and then I also think of like freeform dance, where you don't have a partner and you're just dancing. Um, and I'd like you to sort of pick that apart a little bit and explain like maybe which one of those two fit your model a little bit more, because in my mind, the mind is constantly interacting with our external world, as well as our internal inside of our body world. But um, some people may think that the mind is separate from the body, and so the body is part of the external world, and so it's this interplay between um, the mind and physical reality. Is that dance? Others may feel like it is, that this mind body connection, that they are both connected to each other, that they are one thing, because we know the mind can influence the body and the body can influence the mind, and it's bi-directional that way. So it's certainly a dance that way. But would you say it's more like dancing with a partner or dancing solo?
Mm. Yeah, dancing with my clone. How about that?
Mm.
Dancing with my, or dancing with like another aspect of myself. Um, that has a very specific way of thinking, which can be very annoying sometimes. It has a very specific way of wanting to do things and like move a certain way or or jump or move a certain way. And then and like to me that's like the habituated mind, and some may call that the ego, right? Or maybe our default mode, our default way of being and way of thinking and perceiving the world. And it's unconscious, right? Like, what is it? Is it 95% of the decisions that we make are actually subconscious programming, decisions based on our subconscious programming? And so like the dance for me is like identifying the ways of thinking that stimulate and create ways of being that are no longer useful, and learning how to like switch up the beat a little bit, or try a new dance move,
Mm.
um perceiving the world. And it's just so interesting to me how ingrained some of our how ingrained some of my ways of thinking are. And like talk about dancing, and I wonder if it's maybe a Freudian slip that I actually said that, because like I want to dance, but I'm terrified of dancing. It takes a lot to get me to dance. Maybe like really responsible higher doses of LSD and MDMA to get me to dance, or like some really like deep, kind of dirty, like jungle trance music to like wake up the beast inside of me that wants to cut the dance floor open. Um, and I like I'm just I want to I want to experience new ways of perceiving the world, and really upgrade, um, just the way that I think about things. And especially now, like looking back over the past couple of years and the work that we've done in the campaign, and um, now having this broad network of amazing people across the country, and in some cases globally, like I'm learning how to show up as a better conduit for this work, and this work being like in the psychedelic ecosystem to not only like reform and change laws, but you and I are both at the forefront of like a new culture that's emerging, right? And so how do we like steward that responsibly? And what I'm at least learning for myself is like, man, there's a lot of stuff about me that I would like to integrate and transcend, right? To use like Wilbur philosophy, because um, we're not conducive to the work, right? So it's like learning how to separate the wheat from the chaff in as many ways as possible, and just constantly um, refine the experience and refine the way that I respond to the world. Um, and it's a struggle, dude. Like, I mean, you're a licensed addictions counselor, so I'm sure you see with your clients like their own habitual ingrained ways of being that have caused trauma in their life in many ways, right? Or trauma that induced certain ways of acting and behaving and being in the world. Like, these are real things, man. Like what fascinates me is that I'm learning to look at our body, like our body mind, more as this like really highly advanced like biotechnology.
Mhm.
And in some ways like kind of like that computer system, to hit the reset button and close out all the tabs, and then not go to those tabs anymore because they're a distraction. But how do we like how do we start to, again, it's like everything comes into play. It's like your environment, it's just like set and setting. And when you're going to have a an informed psychedelic experience, right? It's like set and setting. What's your environment? What's your intention? um all these things come into play. How's my office set up to kind of optimize productivity, right? Or when I go home, how is the environment at home set up to inspire like rest and relaxation and rejuvenation? And then what's like the internal set and setting and the external set and setting to create to create the opportunity for and there probably is, but like optimization, like to be our best selves, so
Nice.
yeah.
Yeah, I love when you said, the body mind is super advanced form of biotech. It so is, and we don't think about ourselves necessarily that way. I mean, we just think of ourselves as, flesh sacks, or, just we're just humans, right? But if you can think about yourself as biotechnology, you can begin to, wonder and contemplate and even find ways to hack your own system, right? And that's what we're talking about here, is hacking those subconscious automatic patterns so that we can recreate newer patterns, things that work better for us. And I'm not sure if it's 95% or not. I don't know that statistic, but I do know that our subconscious is so much more powerful than our conscious mind. And yet we tend to put our conscious mind up on this pedestal like it is the ultimate key to understanding, when really it takes up so much less energy, and our subconscious is really what is controlling us. So if we can like learn how to tap into that and learn how to value our subconscious a little bit more, including things like dream states and trance states and all sorts of things, then I think we can learn how to hack our systems a little bit better, and reprogram or meta program ourselves to be better. And dude, I'm the same exact way when it comes to dancing. Like, it takes so much for me to get into a place where I can dance. But as soon as I do and I completely let go, like, it is the best feeling. I can't describe it. I wish I could do that on a regular basis. Um, just by like hitting a switch. And I'm so envious of people who are able to just go out there and bust a move. But letting go into that kind of space and turning off I think it's my mind getting in the way for sure, where I'm thinking about other people's judgments of my dancing and my judgments of myself, and is this appropriate, and blah blah blah. But you get a few entheogens in me, and I'm like, I don't care what other people think. I'm just gonna move this way, and it feels great, and hopefully they like it too, because I'm having a blast. So um I love that hack, being able to move and being able to, I get something similar from my jujitsu, which is, just that movement, that flow, feeling completely embodied, feeling like the mind and the body are completely in sync. Um, and at this point in my jujitsu career, letting go, being able to let go of judgments of others in the room, because by now, like, most people in a jujitsu room are looking at my sparring, my rolling, as like motivation, or as some way for them to learn. And so I'm not really worried too much about what they think about my jujitsu, because I know my jujitsu is advanced and it's good, or it's getting there. It's getting better. I wouldn't say I'm excellent at anything in particular, but yeah, that's really good. I like the biotech uh, analogy for it.
You know what we were just doing there too? We were, well, I'll speak for myself. When I stated out loud, when I spoke into existence, into the world, that when I say I'm afraid of dancing, I just reaffirmed
Yeah,
and strengthened that neural pathway that has me be afraid of dancing.
totally.
Like in every and that's what I'm talking about, right? Like, especially when we speak it out loud,
Hmm.
like it holds power. And it so maybe a better way, what I can start working on is saying, in the past, I did X, Y, and Z. But now people think I'm going to dance like everyone is watching, right? Because then that way, if I know that everyone is watching, then it doesn't matter what I do because they're all watching anyway. But I think it's so important, man. Like language is so critical, and you know, being allowed to speak our mind is so important. Um, and I think like yeah, like there's for me there's certainly a lot of things come up. I mean, dancing is a great metaphor. Like, is it Shiva that the Hindu god that dances? Is he the dancer?
I'm not sure.
I think he's like dancing the world into existence. Maybe your listeners out there, I'm sure some of them will know, but like this whole life is a dance, right? Um, you know, and I'd like to work on my moves a little bit.
Yeah, I'd like to become a full-on like break dancer.
By the way, and I know this has been, we're obviously recording. You'd like to become what?
A full-on break dancer
Dude,
with
I
life.
have a, yeah, exactly, right? Like, how cool would that be? I have a buddy who's a break dancer, and we went to, there's a place out here, I'm sure you've probably heard of it, Everland. Um, it's an amazing collective of individuals who bought some land kind of in, not kind of around the like Castle Rock area, a little bit south of Castle Rock, and they have like 120 acres. It's amazing. Um, and anyway, long story short, they started hosting some more gatherings recently now that the restrictions have uplifted in some ways. And there's a buddy of mine who's just an epic break dancer, and I'm kind of sitting there, you know, with my fuzzy jacket, and looking out these people dancing. And then he's just like strolls right up and just like just whatever he does, he's just like whoa, 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 bam, and does these moves without a care in the world. Download me some of that confidence. I'd like some of that.
Well, I think it's a good time for us to transition into talking about some of the stuff that you're currently doing and that you and I are working out as far as projects working together. I was hoping that we could dig into Vote Nature first, and I have a few questions around that. You know, I know quite a bit about it, but I know the audience probably doesn't, and so I think this is a great platform to be able to talk about what Vote Nature is and what the mission is and what Vote Nature is trying to accomplish and how it's doing that. So yeah, why don't you just kick it off with share with the audience what you've got going on with Vote Nature.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, brother. So Vote Nature is an online digital citizen lobbying platform. And it makes it really, really, really easy, novel, meaningful, and fun for anyone to get in touch with their elected officials about legislative issues that are important to them. And it was birthed from, the idea was birthed from trend lobbyist, kind of earlier this year. And at the time, and I know people might be like, what, psychedelic lobbyist? That's blasphemy. Well, no, it's really good, man, because like the work that I want to do as a lobbyist is to be that bridge between the psychedelic community that's out there, especially here in Denver and here in Colorado, a bridge between the psychedelic community and our lawmakers and policymakers, and to really do the best that I can to kind of represent the needs, wants, and desires of this constituency so that we can create equitable, responsible policy reform. And so a little bit of the backstory. Earlier this year, we were attempting to legislature here in Colorado. And that didn't go through for a number of reasons. It was a pretty wild session this year at the legislature. But our bill ended up getting blocked by Senate leadership. It wasn't even introduced. So, but what I realized, kind of learning the ins and outs of being a lobbyist, and in some ways, kind of being like a dolphin in a shark tank, is what I realized. Like, it's a very obviously a highly political environment, and people have, lawmakers, policymakers, elected officials. I learned a couple of things. First of all, what surprised me to hear from some mentors is that our elected officials don't know anything about these issues. Let's just use, psilocybin for example, right? They don't know anything about psilocybin, so they actually rely on individuals on these issues so that they can then speak to their colleagues, in the state house or the state assembly, and educate their colleagues. I was like, wow, okay, cool. So perfect. I'm more than happy to educate lawmakers about psilocybin and other entheogens and this whole kind of ecosystem. And the other thing I learned is that, and I think this seems kind of obvious at the end of the day, but like policymakers, lawmakers, let's just say a state senator, they have a constituency, they represent a certain part of the state, right? And it's really important for those constituents to be able to basically reach out to their elected officials and say, hey, we support this issue. So take, for example, what's happening in California right now. California, Senate Bill 519, which is a bill that's going to decriminalize in California, just passed the health committee at the state assembly. It passed through the Senate last month, the state Senate, and then it got sent back to the assembly, which is their house, their state House of Representatives, and it just passed their health committee. Now, every single time a bill that's been introduced at any state legislature, it has to go through these different committees before it goes to, like, say, a full vote of the state Senate. It goes through the budget committee, the health committee, the finance committee, etc. Every single time it goes through committee, there's this giant list of calls to action for constituents. Call in and testify at the committee meeting. Show up on the day of the committee hearing, and or not having any support for this bill, send an email to your representative. Giant laundry list of calls to action for folks. But it's like, this is that participatory democracy that this country was supposedly built upon, right? For citizens to be engaged in the political process. What I found is that that's one of the most impactful ways that we can influence lawmakers to change policy, is if their constituents show up and are sending emails, writing letters, testifying at committee hearings, et cetera. It's letting those lawmakers know that that's what the people want, right? And so I needed to figure out a way to make it really easy for people in Colorado, and honestly nationally, to engage with their elected officials here. And that's how Vote Nature was born, because Vote Nature collapsed. And it really utilizes video to share these stories. And so it's like, let's say, for example, let's just go back and look at California again, Senate Bill 519. With Vote Nature, someone will be able to take their phone, record a short video, say, hey, my name is Keven. I really support this bill because psilocybin mushrooms changed my life. I no longer struggle with my depression and anxiety because of these incredible mushrooms, right? Short video, 30 seconds, with the click of a button, they can send that right to their elected official. And so then if we imagine thousands of these types of emails being sent to our elected officials, every week, flooding the inboxes of these lawmakers. Theoretically, they're supposed to listen to their constituents, right, and support these measures. So Vote Nature is a way for out there in the world. These incredible stories of healing and breakthrough and transformation around plant medicine, but also to get those stories in front of people who have the power to change laws, and with the click of a button. So that's what Vote Nature is, and I think it has a lot of potential. It's still fundraising right now. I'm excited because we're going to get a chance to do a pilot test of Vote Nature in Denver over the next couple of months, because we're in Denver. We're right now working to expand on the initiative that we passed 2 years ago, which we can talk. I'm not sure when to segue to that, but we have an opportunity for that. There's a very strong and robust community of people across the entire country that wants to see these laws changed. I have a buddy of mine that says drugs won the drug war last year in 2020, right? Like, we had Measure 110 in Oregon that decriminalized small amounts of all drugs in the state. And then, of course, we had Measure 109 in Oregon that created the country's first legal therapeutic model for access to psilocybin. We have, oh my goodness,
Washington,
8.
DC. Yeah, we have DC.
What's that?
We have DC.
Yep, we have DC.
Yeah.
Yep, DC. I was going to say 8 cities in the country. DC. So what is it? It's Denver, psilocybin, and then the rest of these cities are all other entheogens, right?
Mm-hmm.
Santa Cruz, Ann Arbor, Washington, D.C., Cambridge, Massachusetts, and Ann Arbor is in Michigan, by the way. And then we have Cambridge, Massachusetts, Somerset, Massachusetts, and I want to say Newburgh, Massachusetts. I'm not sure if that's right, but 8 cities that have decriminalized entheogens. And this year, at least as of a couple of months ago, there were 12 states that were considering some kind of psychedelic reform. 12. Most of those states now, those bills have either not, they were either tabled or haven't gone through. But this is a conversation that's in the zeitgeist,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not, and it's in the zeitgeist at the state level where, elected officials are around psychedelics, and most of these are for psilocybin, and so it's just the kind of thing where I think that if we're going to, well, we have an opportunity again to demonstrate that, community wants to be involved in this. They want to see these laws get passed. And if there's any way that we can, throttle that a little bit, and also make the process a little more transparent for regular people, and for people who want to get involved and make an impact in this space, but they don't necessarily have the time to work on a campaign or go collect signatures, or they don't have time to go lobby their elected officials themselves. Vote Nature is a tool that will make it really simple and easy for folks to get involved and make an impact, because no impact is small in this space. Every story, that's something we learned in Denver. Because we won by such a slim margin in Denver, 50.6% of the vote, that demonstrated that every single door we knocked on, every single person that we talked to, every single Facebook post, every single one of those mattered. And so for anybody who wants to get involved, even the seemingly smallest action can make a giant difference. And it can be the difference between a person, voting yes or no on these issues. So it's an advocacy tool at the end of the day. And I think, depending on how well it does, it can scale. Vote Nature can scale nationally. And I think in the future, it can be a tool that can also advocate for lots of different types of issues, whether we're talking about environmental issues, other drug policy reform issues. Vote Nature has the potential to, um, make an impact in how we practice democracy in this country.
Yeah, I think the parts that I love the most about Vote Nature and the concepts behind it are number one, re-democratization of our political system, right? I can't tell you how many people are out there who feel like their vote just doesn't count, that no matter which way that they vote, whatever elected official is, is in office at the time, they're just going to make whatever decisions they want to make, regardless of what the voter says. So I love the idea that, now not only does your vote count, but your voice counts. And this is a great way to do that, right? And another thing that I love about it is the way that Vote Nature engages the story aspect of people, because storytelling has been a part of human culture since the beginning of time. Cave paintings are a way that people were telling stories. And it still is. Every book you read, every movie you watch, every advertisement you see, everything is a story. And being able to give some power back to the constituents to be able to tell their own stories, I think that can be so much more impactful than sending a report to a politician to read, and how many reports do they get across their desk and that they just skim, or they have their assistant read and they're just like, oh God, I don't want to read this dry stuff. But then they see these videos of people's actual stories and people crying on these videos and people saying, this completely changed my life. I think that holds so much power and so much leverage in the future. So I love those pieces about it. Now, for listeners who want to know more, they can go to votenature.org, and Vote Nature is just one word, and figure out more about it and see how they can get involved. But Keven, you said, Vote Nature is still in the piloting stage, still seeking funding through fundraisers. So if there's anybody listening out there who either wants to become a fundraiser themselves or has connections or networking connections to people with funds who want to get involved in the psychedelic movement. I know that there's a lot of people out there right now that just want to find some outlet to be able to pump money into because they believe in this cause, but they don't know which organizations to give it to. And I'm telling them right now, Vote Nature is a great one to give it to. So how do people get involved on that level with fund sharing, fundraising? How do they get in touch with Vote Nature to do that?
Absolutely. Yeah. The best way is to go to votenature.org, and um, people can sign up
Mhm.
right there, and they can sign up for the mailing list.
And it's free,
Um,
right?
and it's free.
Yeah.
It's free. We're going to have some subscription options in the future for members who want to be, like monthly supporters of our work, because that'll be important. But they can sign up. Folks can get on the mailing list, and um, individuals will be the first to know when the platform actually goes live, and be able to get in there and kind of explore around what's possible, start seeing these videos. It operates similarly to a social network. So there's like individuals, when the site is live, they'll be able to follow certain individuals on there who are maybe more active. It's gamified, so people can earn badges and awards for their level of participation. um, and I think hearing you share what you said, Shane, this is this. I think we have to do everything we can these days to reawaken a participatory democracy in this country, because I've been finding myself becoming a nihilist around a lot of this stuff. Like, I don't care anymore. My voice doesn't matter. My vote doesn't count. It doesn't really make a difference. But at the end of the day, it's actually, our voices do matter. The government serves the people. At least that's the way that it's supposed to be in this country. Psychedelics in particular are, well, I think it's the most exciting political issue that we have right now, because it is a political issue, because it has the potential to change so many things.
Mm-hmm.
So votenature.org, folks can sign up for the mailing list. And then people can also, they can also email me directly. You can use email Keven at votenature.org. As well, if people want to learn more, or if they want to get more of a deep dive into what's possible with Vote Nature.
Okay. And you're so right. For the longest time, I was sort of an anarchist, and I anti-authoritarian, and I still carry a lot of those sentiments a lot of the time. But yeah, I refused to participate in the voting system. I didn't believe in the system, and so I didn't want to participate in it. But what I came to and still learning to realize is that voting is a right, and it's not a right that everybody in the world has. A lot of countries don't allow their people free speech. They don't allow their people to vote. We have that freedom here in this country. And the problem with taking a sort of a nihilistic stance is that if you choose not to participate in the system because the system is not working, what ends up happening is you give up that power, you give up that freedom to those governmental bodies, and then they can just do whatever they want with it, right? If you don't voice your opinion, then your opinion really doesn't matter, right? Your opinion only matters if you voice it, and if you share it, because if you don't, then imagine if well, what is it? The current presidential elections, right? Like only like 50 some percent of people actually vote for those things, and so our governmental leadership is based off of that, right? When if everybody voted, who knows what could have happened? Who knows what kind of changes it could be? And if you're out there complaining about what's going on in the country, but you're not participating in changing things, then I don't know if you have a right to be complaining about things. I love. I think it was Ben Franklin said something like, those who are willing to give up their freedoms for safety will get neither of those, something like that.
Yeah.
I think it was Ben Franklin, but I mean, I find that true. Like if you give up your power and give up the power to shape and mold society to elected officials, and you give up your say in the process, then you're giving up a lot of your power in how this country is going to be run, how it's going to be shaped. And I don't know. I find that that's just rolling over to the powers that be. So I love what Vote Nature is doing, and I'm really excited to see the effort continue. But sort of shifting a little bit, there's a lot of decriminalization going on all over the country. You mentioned 12 states. This is a tidal wave. This is a tidal wave coming in, and not just not just with drugs, but with consciousness in general taking a forefront. People are waking up to the idea that, oh hey, like I have this thing, it's called consciousness, and I get to explore it, and I don't have to be told how to explore it, or when, or in what ways. And I think people are waking up to this. It's not just a drug policy revolution, but it's also a consciousness revolution, riding this tidal wave in.
100%. I'm 100%. And I'd like to start talking more about cognitive liberty
Mm-hmm.
in this space, because I mean, so first of all, a person's ability to utilize naturally occurring plant and fungi medicine it's a human right. That's a human right. Um, and I can say that for a couple of reasons. I mean, the first reason is that aside from the last 50 years of history, um, these compounds for thousands of years, right? And albeit they've been used in structured and responsible settings, but these, psilocybin mushrooms, for example, were an integral part of the tribal culture of a lot of indigenous communities in the past. Same thing with with ayahuasca, right, being prevalent down in the Amazon. Same thing with peyote, being a sacrament for Native American tribes here in North America, here in the U.S. Like these plant and fungi medicines, these compounds, these entheogens have we've been evolving with these for thousands of years, and like arguably, I actually love the theory that psilocybin, the rapid growth and formation of the human neocortex. There's nothing to prove that's not the case. It's still hard to prove that is the case, but it could be when you have ancient hunter-gatherer tribes roaming the landscape and finding nourishment and food from cow patties. And it's not so far-fetched.
Mm-hmm.
And then something we don't talk about very often, which we're going to start talking a lot more about over the next few months, is that in Denver, someone's going to have to correct me if I'm wrong, but in Denver, of all the places where entheogens have been decriminalized, Denver is the only city where it's recognized as a human right. Mm. So in Denver, when we passed Initiative 301 and it became law, that law was inserted into Chapter 28 of the Denver Municipal Code. What is Denver's Human Rights Code? And so right there, it kind of begs the question. There were over 90,000 people in the city and county of Denver who voted yes on our initiative. That means there are 90,000 people in Denver who believe that a person's right to use, possess, store, and cultivate psilocybin mushrooms is a human right. To me, that kind of begs the question, well, if 90,000 people in Denver think it's a human right, that's precedent setting right there. And one could make the argument that a person's ability to use these substances is a human rights issue. And I'm going to roll with that because I think it's accurate. I think it's true. It's something we don't talk about a whole lot in this space. It's a radical message to share. It gets people's attention, just in terms constantly trying to figure out like messaging that people want to listen to and learn about. So, and what goes along with that is that those of us who are operating in this space, we believe that individuals should have the choice and the freedom to decide how they want to interact with these medicines, meaning that people have self-autonomy, people have self-regulation, that there's governance, and then even going a step further, that our communities can self-regulate and self-govern with these medicines, mm-hmm. right? And that's why decriminalization is critical, and why within decriminalization, creating opportunities for community healing, to emerge, and really focusing on how are we focused locally. Because even though, say for example, in Oregon Measure 109 passed, great, it's a state law, but what's the impact that has locally? How are individuals and members of communities and neighborhoods getting access to the healing that's possible? And healing can look like healing potentially from trauma, right? Or it can look like finding a way to have a new perspective or perception of the world. And I think to that end too, um, you know, and I'm curious what you think about this, Shane. I don't think it's actually like experience that we have, and then it's the integration afterwards. It's the follow through that actually catalyzes more of that healing. It's stabilizing the experience into our normal everyday life. Um, so to me, this is a human rights issue. Um, it is a drug policy reform issue. It is a mental health issue. It's also a human rights issue. And I'm going to go ahead and say it here. Like, I think the Controlled Substances Act, once people understand like really the political motivations behind the CSA, the the Controlled Substances Act is one long 50-year bloody streak of crimes against humanity.
Mm.
And we've created policies that are to be incarcerated for the possession of small amounts of these substances, and it's specifically targeting certain groups of the population as well.
Mm.
And so the reason why I say that, well, that I brought up that my buddy said drugs won the drug war last year with DC and Oregon is that I think Americans are ready to start prioritizing treatment over criminalization here. And it's so interesting to me that basically with the flick of a switch, with a stroke of a pen, all of these substances became highly illegal and vilified, and now we have to do so much work 50 years later to um, both change the laws and repair the hundreds of thousands of lives globally, right? So we have a lot of work to do, and we need allies. And we really need people to, if anybody out there kind of resonates with at least what I'm sharing today and what we're talking about, like, in order to scale the amount of like treatment that we need to address our mental and behavioral health issues in this country that may in much part may have been created by these crazy drug policies. We need the 35% of American voters to stand up and come out of the psychedelic closet, per se. And I say 35% because there was a recent Harris poll that showed that 30 voters believe that psychedelics like psilocybin mushrooms have a medical value. And so we need that 35% to stand up. And, what is that? Is that 100 million people? 50 million people? And I forget what the term or the phrase is, but, if we think about like the 100th monkey theorem, or we think about like how, was it like morphogenetic fields? I forget the author there, but like when an idea spreads, we're seeing this with the psychedelic movement. It started in Denver. We dropped a couple spores here in the city that spread across the country. And now 2 years later, we have 12 states, 8 cities. What's going to happen in 2022? There's going to be more, and so if we can find a unified voice here, knowing that we're going to have differences in how the policy should look, and natural, but if at the very least we can all stand up with a unified voice together to change these laws, then I think we can see some real magic happen in this country.
Yeah, I agree. And, I have no doubt that that's going to happen eventually. And how it happens, I think, just like with a lot of processes in life, like we can have goals, we can have, yeah, we can have goals towards outcomes that we want to see happen, but we need to let go of how it's going to happen. Because if we hold on too tight to a certain way, um, and it doesn't go that way and we stay rigid, then that gets in our way too, right? So having that flexibility, that flexible mind to be able to say, yeah, this is going to happen, but we don't know how yet. It's going to go through many different iterations, and a lot of people are going to have their opinions, and we're going to find the best possible route given our circumstances. I agree with you. But once that happens, so here's a question for you, and something that I spoke with Sean McAllister on a different episode about. But so the idea of regulation, right? So you said at the communal level, at the local level, you brought up the term self-regulated, right? So with cognitive liberty, with cognitive liberty comes the idea that the individual human entity can self-regulate, right? Like they have the ability to take in whatever substance they want, as long as they can regulate themselves and not do harm to others, right? Um, Now, at the communal level, that also means self-regulated communal practice, right? Like, communal healing systems, and depending on which community you're a part of, which type of healings are available and things like that. But then we start to take that term regulation, which oftentimes comes with legalization, as we saw with cannabis, right? Like the industry becomes regulated, and it becomes regulated at the state level, right? Where now you have to have certain testing and certain safety measures in place and taxation and all these red tape things that come into play, right? So I've heard lots of arguments for a regulated market because of the safety. It would make the legislators happy. It's some people say it's the only way it's going to happen is if it's regulated and taxed, and the rest of the community gets some benefits. Some goes to education, whatever. I've also heard arguments against an unregulated market, where like it's more in line with the community, right? So there's no such thing as a black market anymore. It's legal, but people can buy and sell between individuals. They don't need to go to a dispensary to get their psilocybin or whatever, that they can just grow it on their own. This sort of unregulated market model. And I want to offer a third option, which includes both. I think that it doesn't need to be either or, but it can be both, and we can have both a regulated market and a legal unregulated market, because part of cognitive liberty means that you don't have to go to a therapist to enjoy the healing potentials of these medicines. If you want to, as part of your cognitive liberty, you should have a right to be able to explore on your own, up in the mountains, or whatever, as long as you are regulating yourself and you're staying safe and you're not putting anyone in danger by doing it. So I think it doesn't need to be one or the other, regulated or unregulated. I think that there can be lanes for all three. There can be regulated market, an unregulated market, and maybe even a recreational market. And I think there's space, and there should be space within this cognitive liberty type movement for all three of those options. We shouldn't be again, like, restricted to just one mode of exploring our consciousness. I shouldn't have to go, although it's advised, go see a therapist, go get a guide, go get a sitter, but I shouldn't have to, if that's not my prerogative. You know what I mean?
Mm. I do, and I completely agree with you. Um, I don't want to play the game of polarization anymore as much as possible. So when we're, you know, decriminalization could be looked at as being unregulated, right? It's and the way it's set up in Denver is that we're essentially telling law enforcement not to make arrests. Um, it's a low priority for folks, right? For law enforcement, and we already have laws in place for individuals who may be presenting themselves as a public health or safety risk or issue. You know, drunk driving, driving under the influence, you know, public nuisance, public disturbance. We already have laws to keep the public safe. And we also have to consider that these substances weren't regulated prior to the Controlled Substances Act. There was no regulation. And by the way, there was also thousands of research papers, peer-reviewed, looking at the efficacy of, this is in the 50s and 60s, right? Looking at the efficacy of these substances to treat things like mental and behavioral health things. And and I wonder if we look back and if we look at what regulation might have meant to indigenous groups, right? Like in many of those contexts, these, from what I understand, you know, there was a shaman or a healer who was the steward of these medicines for their community, right? And so there was a little bit of a gatekeeper there. But that was also, we're also talking, you know, hundreds, if not thousands of years ago in cultures where these plants and fungi were an integral part of their society, right?
Sure. I mean, there were gatekeepers, but there were also, I mean, you could just walk out your door and go to a cow patch,
Yeah.
eat some if you wanted to, right?
No, exactly. Yeah.
So I mean, there are
Right,
gatekeepers,
exactly.
but there's probably always been people who don't want to go to the shaman to get
Yeah.
their medicine.
And that's the other side of this too. Like, so the argument is that it can't be either or. It can't be either decriminalization or regulation. It's not going to work.
Mm.
It needs to be both and I love that you use those words specifically, because it needs to be both decriminalization and regulation. Now we get into a headier conversation when we talk about different types of regulation, different types of therapeutic models, let's say. But the argument for therapeutic regulation is that, let's just say somebody who's suffering from complex PTSD or anxiety, or depression, you know, and they're new to this work. They've never had an experience with psychedelics before. I would say that in most cases, that individual is going to want to go to be in a more structured, potentially clinical setting, right, with a doctor and a medical staff. From the data that we have, both from psychedelic survey, well, the psychedelic survey data says that that's only 20% of people. 20% of people who are utilizing psilocybin, let's say, for mental health reasons, have a diagnosable condition where they do need to have some medical oversight. But the other 80%, they can either control their symptoms, or they're looking at this from the perspective of their consciousness, and they may not have a diagnosis, right? So you're right. Like, the rest of those people they may want to go sit in the clinic, but they may also want to go for a walk in the forest, or sit in the comfort and the privacy of their own home with a trusted friend or guide to sit with them on their experience. You know, so that's why this, like, all of this, it comes down to choice and freedom.
Mhm.
You know, and when new policies are being created, if we leapfrog decriminalization and we go straight to a top-down regulated model, we run the risk of creating exclusivity in this space, meaning that the folks potentially who need access to these substances the most may not be able to get it as easily as others, right? At the very least, decriminalization makes it is liberty. It's not really access, it's liberty. It means that, let's use Denver for example, it means that people who are in the city and county of Denver, they can grow their own mushrooms at home, right? And then now we're hoping to change the law so that folks can not only grow their own mushrooms, but they can share or exchange those mushrooms with other adults, and that folks can actually gather together in groups of two or more to engage in practices and ceremony with this medicine. So we need that. And I'm really curious to see what happens when we actually incubate psilocybin and psilocybin services in community, right? Like what's it going to look like to have like a neighborhood, a place where you know that you can go in your neighborhood to get some help if you need it, or to have an experience if you need it, right? Knowing that that's going to, right? Like it's going to look different in the Black community than the white community. It's going to look different in the Native American community than the Asian community. And I say those demographics because those are the demographics that we have mostly here in Denver, in the Hispanic community. Obviously, the Hispanic community is 30% of Denver voters, right, or Coloradans. So these working with these medicines looks different in different communities, which is why we need it decriminalized, and so that communities can self-regulate and self-govern, and individuals have the choice and the freedom to decide where they want to go, who they want to see and sit with, how much they want to take, you know. And I think it's important, since we are talking about, you know, a Schedule I substance. It's really important for individuals to understand that with psilocybin, it's not for everyone, right? There's definitely risks. Those risks can be highly mitigated with what's your intention, what's your environment, you know, who are you with. I tend to think that environment actually has more of an impact on the experience than anything else. And so, you know, for folks out there, I'd be curious. I'm willing to bet, Shane, that a lot of your listeners likely are experienced with psychedelics. Maybe not, but you know, it's important for folks to do their research, right? And then yeah, like we also can't kid ourselves and think that decriminalization only is going to address the needs that we have at scale. You know, Colorado is the 48th worst state in the country for mental health. We're the 33rd worst state in the country in terms of access to mental health services. We have a it's clear that many of the current treatment protocols and interventions to address mental and behavioral health issues don't work for a lot of people. And that, you know, entheogens, psychedelics like psilocybin, the research shows that they can be highly effective. And so we need novel options, novel treatment options, and we need them at scale as well. And so that's, you know, the challenge comes in. The challenge we have is creating equitable regulation. You know, meaning, how are we ensuring that the people who need access to this the most have access to it, so that it doesn't cost an arm and a leg to have an experience with psilocybin in a clinical setting. And I've been learning a lot about this just in the past 6 months about health equity, right? When we talk about regulated models, we want to be creating curb cut policies. What does curb cut mean? So when you look at a sidewalk and you see that the sidewalk slopes at street intersections, that's accessible to wheelchairs, it's accessible to bikes, it's accessible to strollers. It's an accessible sidewalk because it slopes at the bottom. That's the curb cut right there. And so when we talk about curb cut policy, we need to keep health equity in mind. And health equity is, you know, health equity is basically looking at the systems that are in place that ensure that everybody has the same amount of access to in services. And so if we create policy that centers access for marginalized individuals and low income people, then everybody wins. And, you know, I think this is a long game. I mean, I'm in this for the rest of my life. I think that even though even though the movement for policy reform, even though that movement has expanded so and grown so rapidly in the past 2 years, seems like it's almost exponential how fast it's been going. These are all still experiments. Oregon is an experiment. We're going to find out how well that system works. Denver, right now, where psilocybin is decriminalized, that's an experiment. We've collected a lot of data in the past 2 years to see how well it's working, and looking at safety and all these things. So a lot of concerns people have. Some of the opposition that we had was that people thought the sky was going to fall, that we would have, you know, that we'd have individuals tripping on the streets of the 16th Street Mall and out of control, and that there would be a lot more crime and cartel activity and major distribution of mushrooms throughout Denver. It hasn't happened at all. There are folks who make bad decisions on psychedelics. That's never going to stop, right? However, what we've seen, at least in Denver, is that the sky has not fallen. Arrests have decreased by about half, for psilocybin related arrests. By the way, most of those arrests involve other illicit substances, heroin, methamphetamines, um, other, really potentially damaging substances. And we're also finding that most folks who are using psilocybin in Denver and in Colorado, according to the observational data, are doing so responsibly and with intention. And most of them are using them for health and wellness reasons. And thankfully, right now we have the media on our side. I lost track of how many, and it's every week, but I lost track of how many articles there have been in the last 2 years regarding psilocybin and other psychedelics, and they're all mostly positive. Mm-hmm. So, thankfully, like what's in the zeitgeist right now, I think what's in the awareness of people is that psilocybin is powerful technology. And because of that, they need to be stewarded responsibly, and that they need to be, regarded with reverence and respect. All of that means that it's very important to have a structure when a person is engaging with these medicines. And I think most people understand that.
How amazing would that be if that type of ideology followed alcohol use?
Dude.
Right? Like you said, like there's always going to be people who make bad choices on psychedelics. That's always going to be a thing. And I'm just like, how many people make bad choices on alcohol? Like so many, right?
Yeah.
And we have systems in place to deal with that and to get people recovery and all that stuff. Like we can have those same systems in place to help people with psychedelics too. But the fact is that we in this culture, we're coming at this substance use from a totally different level of respect, of veneration, of use, right? We're using it for wellness. We're using it for healing. We're using it for, all these positive reasons. And those sorts of ideologies don't come along with most uses of alcohol. Some people use it for relaxation, de-stressing, but it certainly is not better for your health. It doesn't necessarily move you in a healing way towards your towards your most highest potential of self. It's really interesting, and how these things are legal and illegal, and all the all the hands that have their hands in the pot trying to get money out of the American public because of these alcohol and tobacco and all these things that are legal, and prescription drugs and all these things. It's interesting, and it's something for us all to consider. And this is an amazing time that we have power to change the way we do things here. And that wasn't always available in the past. And right now we're very fortunate to be in this time and space. Well, we went down a long, heady road with that stuff. So I'd like to switch gears just a little bit to something a little bit more uplifting. And I told you I was going to ask you about this on the podcast. So you recently went to a documentary screening on the mystical experience, and the mystical experience is one of the most fascinating aspects of human consciousness. To me, I mean, that's what my entire PhD dissertation is based around, is this mystical experience, drug induced, non-drug induced. It's just this thing that, or this frequency of consciousness that the human bioorganism is able to achieve, whether through meditation or exercise or psychedelics or breathing or whatever. And it transcends culture, it transcends religion, it transcends all, it transcends race, it transcends gender. We all have the potential to experience this strange but amazing thing. And I was unable to make it to the screening, and I regret not being able to go. But I asked you, I said I'd asked for a full verbal report of what you learned and sort of what stood out to you and what was amazing about this documentary. So can you please share with me and the audience just what you learned and what fascinates you about mystical states of consciousness?
100%. Yeah. So the film is called Psychedelia, and it was very much focused on, actually, on LSD, and it shared a lot of the history um, of LSD and kind of psychedelic culture in the U.S. Um, you know what? I might disappoint you because it was actually pretty clinical. It was pretty clinical. But the one thing that I really appreciated about it, there were a lot of things, because it really did, they did a great job doing a deep dive on the history of psychedelic induced altered states of consciousness in the US. And they got, the Leary, with Ken Kesey, and they were really, actually, it was fascinating because so much of the focus was really in that transformative era back in the 60s, which we don't have a lot of insight into these days because it's wrapped up in so much propaganda, honestly, kind of steering away from how beautiful that time was. And had it been not for the intervention of some powers that be, potentially, maybe how much more beautiful our lives, or at least our country, would be right now if there wasn't the intervention. But it was a deep, deep, deep dive into the early histories of, really, I think, the advent of the non-Christian, um, the non-Christian realization of, right, because at the same time there was the kind of this big sexual revolution. There was, obviously, the civil rights movement, and there was the Grateful Dead and the consciousness movement. We had, more, more Eastern traditions getting kind of more awareness and practice here in this country. Um, and so I loved it. And by the way, I brought my son, who's going to be 7 next month. We're getting him started early, because he's already a little wizard. But anything that we can do to safely educate him about, about mystical states of consciousness, like, I'm all about it. I ask him gently not to say the word psilocybin in public, but he's very aware of what I do, for my day job. But I think the it was fun, and the so I want to back up a little bit, because what what I really appreciated about the film was that it really laid a solid foundation for the the history of, I want to say, like a transpersonal movement emerging in our culture, like a humanistic transpersonal movement emerging. And back then it seemed to be the emergence of that culture, um, again, before it was basically, stomped on with a jackboot, right, and shut down for political reasons. So what I love seeing these films, uh, attention and awareness, because it's simply, I mean, it's a way to educate the public. It's a way to get people inspired and curious about, you know, about these states of consciousness. And I like a lot what you said earlier, Shane, just about, you know, it was revolving around the idea that we don't need to induce these altered states of consciousness with any chemicals or compounds necessarily. Where we are the, what did Terrence McKenna say? Maybe it was somebody else, but like, we're the pharmacy, our bodies, right? And I've been I've been getting back into my breathwork practice more recently, with Wim Hof method. I was surprised. I did a breath hold for 2.5 minutes the other day. I'm just gonna, um, the experience of, of creating a DMT like experience using your breath is very real. Something also you said earlier about, I think you may have been alluding to, that these mystical states, they're our birthright. They're an integral part of being human,
Mm.
right? And what I'm learning now. So I think I mentioned early on that I had a couple of deep journeys in May this year. I sat with grandmother ayahuasca, and it was the most challenging experience that I had on with her, with that plant medicine, um, in my 40 years of working with that medicine. And then I also sat with a very dose of psilocybin with a guide, with a sitter, someone who was there to hold my hand, because I needed that person to hold my hand for sure in some of the moments. But what I got was like, I hung up the phone. I was like, I don't need these right now anymore. Like, I got the message. The message was very clear. The message was like, dude, bro, get embodied. If you want to be a better conduit for this work, then let's start looking at other ways to access the numinous, other ways to access these mystical states, and to make them more a part of your daily experience. And they don't have to be these blissed out 6 hour long sessions, right? Like, you can have more structure around your day and your daily practice. Breath work, right? I'm sure for I'm sure you regularly, um, plunge into a flow state. Your jujitsu practice, right? Like, how are we? To me, again, this goes back to, like, um, how are we creating the environment in our life that inspires these states of consciousness? How are we organizing our day, and remembering to breathe, so that we can, you know, both experience the more of these states of consciousness, but then actually take them into our daily life and start to integrate them and start to kind of walk the talk with it.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm what excites me about the psychedelic movement is that at the end of the day, I think it has nothing to do with psychedelics. I think it's about unleashing the potential of the human spirit.
Mm-hmm.
So, in order to co-create a world that works better and is more holistic. Like, I think that's what it's about. It's not really about mushrooms.
Yeah.
It's about liberating humanity.
I love it. And I think that's part of the message that the mushrooms give us sometimes in those spaces. It is kind of unfortunate that the documentary was focused on clinical mystical states. You know, Mystical states of consciousness can happen in clinical settings, but from what I've read and what I've experienced, most instances of mystical consciousness do not happen in a clinical setting. And so perhaps even the clinical setting is not the most appropriate place to even study them, even though, that's sort of what we do here in the West, is take it to that setting. Um, Another thing, well, and I'm hoping that you can, if you wouldn't mind, sharing a little bit about your recent experiences and if you reached that mystical consciousness or not. But one of the major messages that I've received from mystical states in the last year has been, um, in the past, leading up to this last couple of years, I was seeking after mystical experiences as if they were something to be achieved. Um, it's hard to describe, as if like I need to. It's sort of like climbing a mountaintop to get to the summit, right? Like you have to go on a journey and you have to plan it and you have to go up and you get to experience this summit, but then you have to come back down and you're always wanting after more and more of those summits, right? More and more of those peak experiences, it's even called in a lot of circles. Um, but one of the messages I got a few times from mystical experiences in the past year is that every moment of our existence, every moment of our waking and dreaming consciousness is a mystical experience if we choose to engage with it in that way, right? I think it goes back to what we were first saying in the very beginning, like our self-talk, right? Like, am I telling myself every day that this is just a normal, common, everyday experience, or am I telling myself in every moment, like, holy shit, like this is a mystical experience right now, having this podcast through technology, which is, you know, um, faltering at times, but it's still, this is mystical, this is amazing, this is and it's about how we choose to talk to ourselves about reality that influences how we engage with reality, which influences how we perceive and experience it. So one of the experiences I had told me, these peak mystical experiences is not actually what you're going after, it's not actually what you're searching for. What you're searching for is the mystical in everyday experience. And that has been a profound insight for me, that again, like I try and integrate it every day, and it takes practice because my my pre-programmed automatic subconscious patterns tells me that no, this everyday reality is just common and it's not mystical. So I have to go in and reprogram it every moment that I can remember, and just tell myself like, no, every moment is magical, every moment is mystical, every moment has mystery, and I need to be curious and fully engaged in every moment. So that was a big insight for me, and I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing some of your some of the actual experience that you had in the Aya or the psilocybin sessions, and what that led you to.
um,
No pressure.
yeah, well, because I'm still learning how to talk about it in a way that can reach people,
Mm,
right? Because so, at least from my own experience, so many of these mystical experiences are ineffable.
mhm.
They're hard to describe. And then when you try to put language to them, it doesn't quite do the experience justice. Now, maybe we can like jack me into the matrix machine and upload some Terrence McKenna speak into me, and I could do that better. Um, but of language, right? And how language can induce a mystical state of consciousness, right? When you're listening to somebody and becoming entranced by their words and feeling the inspiration rise in your body by what someone is saying. It's so powerful. Um, and like, right, it's the same thing for how we speak to ourselves. Are we speaking to ourselves in a way that's inspirational, in a way that's reaffirming the miracle of our existence? Or are we speaking to ourselves in a way that's like, oh, just humdrum, whatever, I'm living my life and mechanically going through my day-to-day activities? And so, okay, so I'll talk about a little bit about my experience with psilocybin. So, and I'm not going to give too many of the details. However, I was in Denver and I 7 grams of freeze-dried penis envy mushrooms. And when you freeze dry the mushrooms, from what I understand, it breaks down the cell walls and actually makes the psilocin more bioavailable. Um, and the onset is faster as well. So it was an incredible experience. And it was very well planned, very well structured. I was with a good friend that I trust, and he was my guide, and it was in his space. Now, but here's the curveball, and the universe loves, like, I love when the universe throws curveballs, even when it hurts. His neighbors were having a rager next door. And I'm talking like loud electronic, and I was going to a festival with this experience. So that's why I say, like, environment. I think your environment has the most impact on your experience with these medicines. So what I experienced in a nutshell, and I realized how miraculous it is that we're actually alive on this planet right now, is that I'm sitting, in the lying down in the bed with my eyes closed inside this experience, about 2 hours in. So I'm at the peak of the experience. I pulled out my earplugs because it didn't matter. I could still hear every word being spoken next door, plus all the music. And while being inside this, very safe, very comfortable as well. But the container had a little bit more color because of what was happening next door. And it's the one thing I noticed was how fascinating it was, is like how much more our senses are kind of like, the volume gets turned up. Because I could hear everything happening next door, even like the quietest conversations. Not someone whispering, but somebody talking kind of normally, like probably like I'm talking now. Like, I feel like I could hear that. Plus, there's all the laughter and the music and the yelling. But what it was for me is that on my right hand side, and on our right hand side, if we look at like traditional yogic traditions, our right hand side tends to be the masculine side, right? And on that right hand side is where my friend was sitting, and he's very noble, and what I felt like had like just patiently present for me. But I also felt like that from that side of the room where he was sitting, there was this immeasurably abundant, unmanifest, creative information coming in, being beamed into my awareness. And I could feel it. It's like, wow, like there's so much that's possible. There's so much creative potential that we all have as human beings to actually be creators, like creators with a capital C, like to co-create as divine individuals our existence on this planet. So there's this beautiful information coming in. And then on my left hand side, and the left hand is, can the divine mother or the feminine, and like the container, right? Like very earthy, right? So my left-hand side is where the window was, where next door was happening, and the music coming in, and the grungy, sweaty, dirty, playful, bouncy laughter, yelling happening next door. And so I had this visceral experience of balancing those two energies in this vehicle here. Um, which and I got pulled in this direction, and I got pulled in this direction. Um, there were certainly tricks of the mind happening where I thought folks over there were talking about the experience. Like I thought I heard someone talk about set and setting over there. Um, and it was beautiful because it was, and I'm still working with this, but it was beautiful because it let me know that the very fact that we're alive right now and that you and I are having this conversation and that we're breathing and we have this unique ability to um, make independent decisions and analyze the world and look at things differently. Like we can actually think that we're individuals, that we have a beating heart, that we have a soul and a spirit that's independent but not separate from everything. I was like, I finally understood how fragile this is, and how how everything is interconnected, and that every single thought that I have and every single action that I take has an impact on the entire reality in some big or small way. And by the way, that's that's everyone. That's everyone. Um, and like the fact that we can hold these dueling energies together in order to manifest an experience of being alive and being human. I don't know what else to describe it except for miraculous.
Mystical.
It's mystical, dude. And like like that's what I want to see more of. Can I read something? Because it reminded me of I'd like to share something. If that, there's a book out that I recommend you, if you haven't read it yet, in your audience, to check it out. It's a book called The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible. And it's by a gentleman named Charles Eisenstein. He wrote Sacred Economics and a couple of other books. I've been sharing this with a lot of people because it relates to so many things. So he has basically like a list of 9 principles for interbeing, for our interconnectedness as human beings together on this planet. And this list is a little bit adapted, but it's almost verbatim. Okay, so number 1 is my being partakes of your being and all beings. Number 2, what we do to another, we do to ourselves. Number 3, each of us. Number 4, the purpose of life is to express our gifts. Number 5, every act is significant and has an effect on the cosmos. Number 6, we are fundamentally unseparate from each other, from all beings, and from the universe. Number 7, every person we encounter and every experience we have mirrors something in ourselves. Number 8, humanity is meant to join fully the tribe of all life on Earth, offering our uniquely human gifts toward the well-being and development of the whole. And number 9, the last one, purpose, consciousness, and intelligence are innate properties of matter and the universe. And I think
that's a little bit on number 3. Could you repeat number 3? Oh, hold on. It just cut out again. Yeah, do number 3.
Am I back?
Ready, go.
To number 3. Number 3, each of us has a unique and necessary gift to give the world.
Nice. That's an important one.
Yeah. Which other ones did I miss? Because
Just
we've
that
been
one.
cutting in and out this whole time.
Yeah, I know.
Dude.
It was just that one that you missed. And who knows, like sometimes if we have a weird internet connection, the Zoom recording actually picks up the full conversation, and it's just our experience of it that is cut in and out. So, who knows? I'll have to go back and listen to it again when I post it to see if that actually happened or not. But yeah, thank you for sharing that. Those 9 principles are amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, how are we, like, this is the fun we're supposed to have, right? Like being human with everything that it has. Like, I'm learning how to have a little bit more fun, right? And like every single interaction we have is an opportunity to learn something new,
Hmm.
potentially. And like that can be fun. And and I think, like, really, like, that's like, because I can be very serious and very heady if I need to be, very cerebral. And I'm like, that's why I was talking about dancing earlier. It's like, let's, how much happier would I feel? How much more fulfilled would I feel for myself if I had a little bit more fun every day? But it takes, like, you know, um, and I do have fun. Like, there's stuff that I do this. I have fun. But like this movement, this psychedelic movement, and especially when we start talking about, like, the birthright of mystical states, like, it's like we're stepping into the great unknown. I've been saying more and more to people these days, is like, it is, how cool is it that we get to be alive at this moment in history with all of these things happening all at once, and I bet people would say the same thing 100 years ago. But, like, we have the internet of things, the proliferation of artificial intelligence technology. We have lockdowns, and we have viruses. We have the psychedelics gaining more attention and mainstream awareness. We have, like, I think we're in the middle of a massive cultural transformation right now. Um, and we're moving towards a more global system, obviously. But what does that look like? Does that mean, like, top-down globalization, where we have, like, you know uh technologies that monitor our every move, and, like, kind of like some other parts of the world? Or are we creating something where we're realizing our innate potential as all being connected with each other in this experience of interbeingness, where we can, focus on how are we propping people up locally? How are we creating these decentralized mechanisms that models the mycelium,
Hmm.
right? And because that's what, mycelium is decentralized. So, and that's a rabbit hole for another time. There's probably a lot in there, but I'm just excited to be alive, because, and I have to, like, really work on reminding myself of that every day, because, there are a lot of things in my experience that can cause stress. But it's like, okay, which comes back to, like, reactions or responses. How am I responding to things? And, striving to be the eternal student, and just be open to learning and sharing my gifts with people like yourself and your audience in the world.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap it up. And I want to be respectful of your time and, say thank you so much for coming and sharing not only your personal experiences, but sharing more about all the work you do. And, I think a lot of what we talked about today, it's going to hit home with a lot of listeners out there, just because we talked about a lot of, heady things, complicated things, political things, but throughout, there's a stream throughout all that we talked about that is just about innate humanity and just what it
Yeah.
means to be human and what it means to realize our humanity, and more importantly, what it means to fully engage with being a human being. So I want to thank you, Keven, for coming and reminding me of all those things that I need reminders for. And, for being a part of the 100th episode. It's been awesome. And for all you listeners out there, I just want to remind you all, you are human and you are experiencing something very rare and precious and fragile, but phenomenal in its potential. So go and explore that and go and see what you can achieve and see how you can contribute to greater humanity, because we are all one large organism. So thanks again, Keven. I appreciate you, and I appreciate you being on the show.
It was an honor and a pleasure, Brother Shane. Thank you. I look forward to seeing you soon.
Yeah, see you soon. Conversations with the Mind podcast is sponsored by mindops.com. You can find us at www.mind-ops.com. We're an eclectic counseling company providing mental health and mental performance services to individuals, small and large groups, teams, businesses, military, through face-to-face sessions or at a distance using phone or confidential video chat apps. We bring a unique Buddhist Western lens and specialize in general psychotherapy for all mental difficulties, sport and performance psychology for performance enhancement, addiction counseling for any maladaptive or destructive habits, and psychedelic integration therapy to make the most from your visionary medicine work. We are available as well for corporate workshops to address the needs of your employees' wellness.